Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We love tackling those ancient mysteries, maybe challenging some things you thought you knew.
Definitely.
And today, well, we've got a big one. Think about a prophecy, centuries old, but maybe more precise than we often realize.
We're talking about Gabriel's 70 weeks prophecy, the one given to Daniel way back in the 6th century BCE. It's famously enigmatic.
Right, and our deep dive today, it's really grounded in some fresh analysis by Mark Mountjoy. He published a work called the Amillennial Exegesis of Gabriel's 70 weeks prophecy.
Yeah, through True Christian Press. And it
Right.
really throws down a gauntlet challenging some, let's say, standard interpretations. It's fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. So our mission, if you will, is to unpack this. We're exploring Mountjoy's core idea that this prophecy wasn't about some vague spiritual thing or events far off in the future.
No, he argues it found its complete, precise fulfillment in a specific slice of history. We're talking 62 to 136 CE, all centered around the Second Temple.
Exactly. So we'll dig into the evidence he presents, why he reaches that, frankly, pretty bold conclusion, and importantly, what that might mean for how you understand history, maybe even faith itself.
Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start at the beginning then. This 70 weeks prophecy. Daniel 9.24:27. Why has this short passage caused, well, centuries of debate? What's it actually about?
Well, context is everything, isn't it? You have Daniel, he's deeply troubled. He's been reading Jeremiah's prophecy about the 70 years of exile coming to an end, but Jerusalem is still in ruins.
Right.
So in Daniel 9, he's pouring his heart out, praying specifically for your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain. He's focused. And Gabriel shows up. His response, this whole 70 weeks thing, it's a direct answer to that prayer. It lays out a timeline specifically determined for your people and your holy city. That specificity is really the starting point for this whole analysis.
Okay, that framing is crucial.
It is. Now, before we dive into the critique, it's important to acknowledge amillennial theology. It's a major way folks interpret prophecy.
Yeah, maybe just a quick refresher on that.
Sure. So amillennialism generally sees the 1,000 years in Revelation symbolically representing the whole age between Christ's first and second comings. It's known for its Christ-centered focus, its historical awareness, trying to ground things in history, and often a more, let's say, pastoral approach rather than getting lost in complex charts.
Okay, so valuable contributions there.
Absolutely. Widely respected strengths.
But here's where Mountjoy, even coming from that kind of perspective, sees a problem, right?
Yeah.
Specifically with this prophecy.
Exactly. This is the core challenge he raises. He argues that even though amillennial scholars value historical context with Gabriel's 70 weeks, they tend to universalize it. Meaning they take that really specific language, your people, your holy city, and apply it much more broadly to the entire church across all time or, general spiritual truths. And Mountjoy's point is, doing that kind of obscures what Gabriel might have intended, a precise chronological fulfillment tied directly to the Jewish people and Jerusalem in a specific historical window. It lets interpretations kind of float into the indefinite future or become purely spiritual metaphors.
Okay, so if Gabriel's message was that specific, aimed at Daniel's people and city, does the New Testament itself back that up? Does it talk about fulfillment in those localized historical terms? Or does it lean more towards that broader spiritual view?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Mountjoy argues, and it's quite compelling, that the New Testament writers consistently link Gabriel's prophecy to events right around the time the Second Temple was destroyed.
Okay.
Which, directly contradicts the idea that fulfillment is still way off in the future or just symbolic.
So give us an example. Where do we see Jesus himself engaging with this?
The clearest place is probably the Olivet Discourse. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Jesus explicitly mentions the abomination of desolation.
Right, quoting Daniel.
Exactly, quoting Daniel. And he ties it directly to the coming destruction of Jerusalem. He's warning his disciples about that specific event impacting that city.
Not some far future global thing necessarily.
Precisely. And look at the language he uses. He says the days would be cut short. The Greek is kolobus, like docked, shortened for the sake of the elect.
Cut short. That implies a defined period, doesn't it?
It really does. A definite period with boundaries, not some open-ended church age. And Luke's version is even more specific, talking about Jerusalem being trampled by Gentiles. It's all very focused on concrete historical events happening to Jerusalem.
Okay, so Jesus sets the stage. What about his followers? Does this understanding show up in the early church?
Absolutely. Think about Stephen in the book of Acts, his martyrdom. What were the charges against him?
speaking against the temple and the law, right? Saying Jesus would destroy the place.
Exactly. Acts 6 says they accused him of speaking against this holy place and the law and claiming Jesus would destroy the temple. Now connect that back to Daniel 9.27.
The people of the prince who shall come shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease.
Right. Mountjoy argues Stephen's bold proclamation and his death for it shows just how imminent everyone understood the temple's end to be. It wasn't abstract, it was happening. The end of that whole sacrificial system was near.
So we see it in Jesus' words, in Stephen's actions. Any other New Testament writers who seem to get this specific historical connection? What about Paul?
Paul's another key figure here. Look at 2 Thessalonians 2. He talks about the man of lawlessness.
The one who takes his seat in the temple of God?
Yes. That imagery directly parallels Gabriel's abomination of desolation. And think about why Paul is writing this. It's pastoral advice. He's addressing concerns in that community.
Implying they expected this stuff to happen relatively soon, within their lifetimes.
That's the argument. It wasn't about some event thousands of years later. It seems connected to developments they were seeing or anticipating within Second Temple Judaism itself.
Okay. And then there's Revelation, often seen as the most symbolic, future-focused book. Does it fit this pattern too?
Surprisingly, yes, according to this reading. Revelation repeatedly uses these specific time markers, 42 months, 1,260 days, a time, times, and half a time.
Which is 3.5 years or half of a 7-year week.
Precisely. And crucially, Revelation explicitly links these periods to Jerusalem. It calls it the Holy City, even the great city where their Lord was crucified in chapter 11.
Okay.
So when you line it all up, Jesus, Stephen, Paul, Revelation, there's this consistent thread pointing towards the events surrounding the Second Temple's destruction as the fulfillment ground for Gabriel's 70 weeks.
Right. The New Testament evidence seems pretty focused. But now the big question, does actual history line up? Did events in the 1st and 2nd century CE really match these, well, quite precise prophetic markers like 42 months?
This is where Mountjoy's analysis really brings things into sharp focus. He argues the alignment with the historical record, specifically the Jewish revolts against Rome, is remarkable.
Okay, let's break that down. First, the first Jewish revolt, that's what, 67 to 70 CE?
Roughly, yes. And critically, how long did the main phase of intense fighting last?
Approximately 42 months.
42 months, there's that number again.
Exactly. And it culminates, of course, in the catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple, traditionally dated to the 9th of Av, 70 CE.
And how does that connect back to Daniel 9.27?
Remember the line. In the middle of the week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering.
Right.
Historically, the daily sacrifices, the core of temple worship, actually stopped several weeks before the temple fell in 70 CE. And crucially, they never resumed. This wasn't just a temporary pause. It was the permanent end of the entire sacrificial system.
So that cessation of sacrifice was the midst of the week, the breaking point.
That's the argument, a very specific historical event fulfilling a specific prophetic detail. It's a powerful anchor point.
Okay, that's compelling for the first half, but the prophecy talks about a whole week, 70 weeks in total. What about the rest?
This is where it gets, well, even more interesting, potentially. Fast forward about 60 years, we have the Second Jewish Revolt, the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 136 CE, right? Led by Simon Bar Kokhba.
Correct. And guess how long that revolt lasted?
Let me guess. 42 months.
Exactly 42 months, just like the first one.
Wow, okay.
And its conclusion was just as decisive. Hadrian crushes the revolt, rebuilds Jerusalem as a Roman city, Aelia Capitolina, and bans Jews from even entering. A total final end to any Jewish political or religious control of the city for centuries.
So 2 distinct revolts, both lasting 42 months, separated by roughly 60-odd years, with the temple destruction right in the middle.
Yes. And Mountjoy connects these dots. He argues the chronological precision here, 2 42-month periods, isn't coincidence. It's evidence that the final 70th week of Daniel's prophecy wasn't fulfilled as one continuous 7-year block,
But as 2 separate halves.
as 2 distinct halves separated by that crucial event in 70 CE, the destruction of the temple, which marked the end of sacrifices. This historical pattern, he argues, fits the prophetic language of the week being cut in the midst.
Okay, and Mountjoy gives this whole period a name, doesn't he? The Parousia Arc.
Yes, the Parousia Arc. He defines it as roughly 62 to 136 CE, about 74 years in total.
And his argument is that this 74-year time frame saw the complete fulfillment of everything. Jesus' Olivet Discourse predictions, Gabriel's prophecy, and the total dismantling of the Old Covenant system.
That's the core thesis. Now, the term Parousia itself might need some unpacking here.
Right, usually translated second coming. People often picture a single, dramatic, end-of-the-world event.
Exactly. But Mountjoy, following some other scholars, interprets Parousia or coming in this context differently, not as an instantaneous flash, but as a process, a period of divine judgment and transition.
A process. How so?
A systematic dismantling of the old order, the temple, the priesthood, the sacrificial system manifesting through real historical events. The wars and rumors of wars, the famines and earthquakes, the signs Jesus talked about in Matthew 24 weren't just precursors. They were part of this coming in judgment against that specific covenantal structure.
So the coming was Christ acting through these historical upheavals during that 74-year arc.
That's the idea. It makes sense then of why the New Testament writers Paul, James, Peter consistently wrote as if the end or the Lord's coming was imminent at hand.
Because for them, related to the Old Covenant system centered on Jerusalem, it was happening within their generation or the next.
Precisely. The temple's fall in 70 CE ended the sacrifices forever. The Bar Kokhba revolt, ending in 136 CE, cemented the end of that whole politico-religious structure. The institutional obstacles were gone, clearing the way for Christ's spiritual kingdom, the New Covenant, to be fully established without its predecessor lingering.
Okay, the historical alignment is striking, especially those two 42-month periods. But the idea of a divided week, splitting Daniel's 70th week into two parts separated by decades, it sounds, well, maybe a bit convenient to fit the history. Is there actual biblical support for dividing the week like that? Or is it just interpretive gymnastics?
That's a fair question. Is it just forcing the data? Mountjoy argues no, it's not convenience. There's a consistent biblical pattern pointing towards this very thing.
What pattern?
The pattern of the half week. Think about it. When the prophets or Jesus or Revelation talk about specific time periods related to these end times events centered on Jerusalem and the temple, what time frame do they consistently use?
Well, we just talked about it. 42 months, 1,260 days, Daniel's time, times, and half a time.
Exactly. 42 months is 3.5 years. 12,260 days is roughly 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time is widely understood as 1 year plus 2 years plus half a year, 3.5 years.
Okay, so always half of a prophetic week of 7 years.
Always half a week. Daniel 7.25, Daniel 9.27 itself says in the midst of the week, implying a division. Jesus uses that word kolabuk, cut short. Revelation hammers it home repeatedly in chapters 11, 12, and 13. Mountjoy argues this isn't accidental. This systematic consistency across different books, different authors, points to a deliberate divine design. The final week was meant to be understood in two halves.
That consistency is hard to ignore.
It leads to another fascinating point in the analysis, involving Revelation chapter 10. Remember when John hears the seven thunders speak?
Yeah, and he's told not to write down what they said. Seal it up.
Exactly. Seal it up. Mountjoy proposes a really intriguing interpretation here. He suggests those seven thunders represented judgments that were, in a sense, prophetically moved. They were held back from the first half of the week.
Held back?
Held back and reserved for the very end, unleashed during that second 42-month period, the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 CE.
Okay, where does he get that from?
He connects it to Revelation 20, verse 9, which describes the final judgment in that sequence. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them.
Fire from heaven. That sounds familiar.
It should. It deliberately echoes Genesis 19, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, fire and brimstone, often associated with thunder and lightning in ancient thought.
Okay, so the thunders, sealed earlier, are unleashed as this final fiery judgment in the second half week. But how does this connect to the Levitical priesthood?
Now here's where the argument gets incredibly layered, almost poetic in its tragic irony. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, described their destruction using the term thunderbolt.
Okay. Thunderbolt.
Now think about the high priest's garments. Josephus again describes the sacred vestments. He explains that the little golden bells on the hem signified thunder, and the pomegranates woven alongside them signified lightning.
Wait, really? The high priest wore symbols of thunder and lightning.
For centuries. For over a millennium, the Levitical priesthood, the whole system of worship centered on the temple, literally wore the very symbols of the divine judgment that destroyed Sodom.
Wow. The prophetic irony is staggering.
Isn't it? So, Mountjoy argues, those seven thunders, the sealed-up judgment, were finally unleashed during that second revolt, 132-136 CE. And how did the priesthood itself meet its ultimate final end during that same revolt?
I vaguely recall something about Bar Kokhba and his uncle.
Exactly. Bar Kokhba, the man hailed by some as the Messiah who would restore Israel's glory, got into a dispute with his own uncle, Eleazar the priest, thought to be the last functioning high priest. And Bar Kokhba physically kicked him, causing his death.
So the supposed restorer killed the last high priest.
The supposed deliverer destroyed the remnant of the very priesthood that had carried the symbols of divine judgment for centuries. It's this incredibly potent fulfillment, Mountjoy argues, of Hebrews 7.1. For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. The system ended, symbolically and literally, at the hands of its own failed hope.
That adds a whole different layer to understanding that historical event.
It really does, and it ties into another theological necessity explored in the analysis, Satan's binding and release in Revelation 20.
Okay, how does that fit the divided week?
Revelation 20 says Satan is bound for 1,000 years, then released for a little season, micron chronon in Greek. And importantly, it says his release must happen. It's a divine necessity. Dei.
A little season?
Mountjoy argues that this necessary little season of Satan's release corresponds precisely to that second 42-month period, 132-136 CE.
How does that work with the timeline?
Think back to Jesus' promise to cut short the days of the first tribulation, Matthew 24. If the war had gone on for a full 7 years continuously from, say, 66667 CE, the destruction and potential Roman genocide would have been even worse.
Right.
So the first 42 months, roughly 6770 CE, were the period of intense tribulation, Satan's great wrath, Revelation 12. Then the temple falls. Rome spends a few years mopping up, like Masada falling in 73 CE.
Okay.
Then comes a period of relative quiet in Judea, roughly 73 to 132 CE, about 59 years. This, Mountjoy suggests, is Satan's binding period, corresponding to when Jesus described the unclean spirit leaving a man and the house being swept clean and put in order, Matthew 12. Judea was under Roman occupation, pacified but religiously empty without the temple.
The swept clean period.
Exactly, but what happens in the parable after the house is swept clean? The spirit returns with 7 more wicked spirits, and the final state is worse. That return, Mountjoy argues, is Satan's necessary release for the little season.
The second 42 months, 132-136 CE, the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Yes. Fulfilling the mandatory release, completing Daniel's 70th week in its second half, and playing out that parabolic pattern from Matthew 12, the final state for that old covenant structure was indeed worse than the first.
And that reading also suggests the 1,000 years of Satan's binding in Revelation 20 aren't meant to be literal calendar years, right?
Correct. It suggests it's symbolic, much like the structure of the parable in Matthew 12, representing that interim period between the two halves of the final week's fulfillment.
Wow. Okay, this framework, tying the prophecies so tightly to these specific historical events between 62 and 136 CE, it definitely presents a challenge to more standard ways of reading these texts. What does Mountjoy see as the major implications for other eschatological systems?
Well, he argues it creates significant problems, particularly for full preterivism, which typically sees everything fulfilled by 70 CE, and also for traditional amillennialism.
How so?
Full preterism struggles to account for that second 42-month period of the Bar Kokhba revolt and the necessity of Satan's later release. It doesn't easily fit the all done by 70 CE model.
Okay.
And traditional amillennialism, as we discussed earlier, often spiritualizes the specifics or pushes fulfillment into an indefinite future. Mountjoy argues that approach doesn't grapple adequately with the precise historical alignments, that swept clean interim period, or the consistent biblical focus on half-week time markers we just unpacked.
So it challenges both ends, in a way.
It challenges interpretations that either stop too early, 70 CE, or fail to anchor the fulfillment in the specific historical context Gabriel and the New Testament writers seem to point towards.
So bringing this home for someone listening,
Right.
If we take this analysis seriously, what does it mean for you today?
Yeah.
How might it shift your understanding of where the church fits into the big picture of salvation history?
It's potentially a pretty significant shift. If Gabriel's 70 weeks prophecy found its complete and precise fulfillment back in that Second Temple period, ending by 136 CE,
Okay.
then we aren't living in some kind of already not yet phase where the core Old Testament prophecies about Israel and the temple are still waiting for a final future fulfillment.
We're not waiting for the 70th week to start or restart.
Exactly. According to this view, it's done. Finish. We are living in the fully accomplished reality of Christ's victory over the entire Old Covenant order. That transition is complete.
What does that mean for the church then?
It means the church isn't just some temporary parenthetical thing waiting for something else to happen with ethnic Israel or a rebuilt temple. It means the church is the permanent heir to God's covenant promises.
The Israel of God,
Mm.
in Paul's language.
You could say that. A reality definitively established when the Old Covenant system, centered on the physical temple and its sacrifices, ended permanently in 70 CE, with the final nail in the coffin, perhaps, in 136 CE. Most biblical prophecy, understood this way, is describing that momentous transition, the replacement of the Old Covenant with the New. And that transition is finished history,
That really reframes how you read large chunks of the Bible, doesn't it?
especially the prophetic parts.
It certainly does. It suggests that understanding biblical prophecy is maybe less about trying to decode today's headlines or predict a far-off future, and much more about understanding a foundational shift in God's plan that has already decisively occurred.
Okay, let's try to sum up this deep dive then. The core message from Mount Doyle's analysis that we've explored is this. Gabriel's 70 weeks prophecy, given specifically about Daniel's people and holy city, was precisely fulfilled.
Right. Not vaguely or spiritually across millennia, but historically within that specific time frame of roughly 62 to 136 CE, centered on the events surrounding the Second Temple. The 70 weeks are complete. Finished. The New Covenant age isn't just inaugurated, it's been decisively and fully established since those events.
Yeah, it's a perspective that definitely challenges you to re-examine some common assumptions about biblical timelines and what the end times really referred to for the original writers and readers.
So here's something to really chew on as we finish. If this perspective holds weight, if the end, in that specific sense of the Old Covenant order's termination and Christ's judgment coming against it, has already occurred, what does that mean for us, right here, right now?
How does it change things if Christ's kingdom isn't just a future hope, but in a profound way an already completed and reigning reality established through those first-century events?
What does it really mean to live today as the inheritors, not of a battle still looming, but of a victory already fully won and accomplished over that old system?
That's the question to ponder, something to think about long after this discussion ends.